Have you ever had a neighbor so entitled that they thought your property was just an extension of their own? Imagine coming home after a long day only to find your driveway completely blocked by an SUV and the driver refusing to move. Stick around because this is exactly how it started with my HOA's president, the woman I now call Karen. Before we dive in, let me know which country you're watching from. I love seeing where people tune in for these wild HOA stories. It all began one Friday afternoon when I pulled up to my farm-style property on the edge of the neighborhood. I had errands to unload, heavy feed bags, tools, and supplies, but my driveway was completely obstructed. There it was, a shiny black BMW SUV parked sideways across the entrance, blocking every inch of access. At first, I thought it was an accident. Maybe someone had broken down. Maybe it was just temporary. But when I stepped closer, I saw the fresh tire tracks deliberately cutting across my gravel and the smug placement of the car like it had been left there on purpose. Then I noticed the HOA decal sticker on the back window, proudly displayed like a badge of authority. And that's when I realized this wasn't random. This was Karen's doing. Karen, the HOA president, had been a thorn in my side ever since I moved in. She hated that my property wasn't under their HOA control, even though it bordered the neighborhood. She couldn't find me, couldn't dictate my paint colors, couldn't control what I built, and for someone obsessed with authority, that burned her up inside. So instead, she resorted to intimidation tactics. Flyers taped to my mailbox about community standards, harassing letters in my post, and now, the boldest move yet, physically blocking me from entering my own property. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. My truck idled behind me, feed bags still in the bed, and the sun was starting to set. I had work to do, animals to tend, and things to unload. The longer I stared at that BMW, the angrier I became. Neighbors began to peek out from their windows and porches. Some pretended not to watch, but I could feel the eyes on me. They wanted to see how I'd react, because everyone in that neighborhood knew that Karen didn't just test boundaries, she bulldozed over them. Normally, I try to take the high road. I'll talk, I'll reason, I'll wait for people to come to their senses. But not this time. Not when someone thought they could literally bar me from my own home. So I went to the barn. Inside sat my pride and joy, a massive steel-framed tractor, a machine built to move dirt, hay, and whatever else stood in its path. As I climbed into the cab, I knew this wasn't going to be subtle. It was going to be loud, obvious, and unforgettable. The engine roared to life, echoing across the street. Curtains fluttered as more neighbors peeked out. The tractor's headlights cut through the dusk as I steered it toward my driveway. The BMW sat there, sleek and polished, its paint reflecting the last rays of sunlight. I eased the tractor forward, lowering the forks until they slid just beneath the undercarriage of Karen's precious SUV. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a sharp growl of hydraulics, the tractor lifted. The BMW's tires left the ground, dangling helplessly. Gasps erupted from across the street as the vehicle tilted, its alarm blaring in protest. I shifted into reverse, carried the SUV across the gravel, and with one controlled motion, tipped it sideways into the shallow ditch that bordered my property. The sound was deafening, metal scraping, tires spinning, alarms screaming. Dust kicked up in the air as the luxury vehicle settled, awkwardly, in the dirt, half on its side, completely disabled. And just like that, my driveway was clear. I parked the tractor, stepped down, and dusted off my hands. For the first time that evening, I felt the tension break. The driveway was mine again. My truck could pull through, my animals could be fed, and the message had been delivered loud and clear, block my property once and you won't like the result. By then, the crowd had gathered. Some neighbors whispered, some smirked, and others looked horrified. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the whole spectacle. And somewhere among them, though I didn't see her directly, I knew Karen was watching. Because this wasn't just about a blocked driveway. It was about control. Karen wanted to prove that her HOA power extended to me, even though the law said otherwise. But I had just shown everyone that her influence had limits. Her ditch now cradled her BMW like a broken toy, and I knew it wouldn't be long before she confronted me face to face. As the alarm continued to wail into the night, I turned back toward my property, unloaded my supplies, and prepared myself for what I knew was coming. This wasn't the end of the fight, not by a long shot. This was just the beginning of a war with Karen and her HOA. The morning after I flipped Karen's BMW into the ditch, the neighborhood felt different. Word had already spread, and by sunrise, my driveway had turned into something of a spectacle. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers rubbernecking to catch a glimpse of the luxury SUV still tilted awkwardly in the mud, hazard lights faintly blinking, alarm long since drained of power. Karen had not shown herself yet, but I knew she was brewing. People like her didn't disappear, they regrouped. And sure enough, before long, the HOA machine came rolling in. By mid-morning, a group of board members gathered at the edge of my property, clipboards in hand. They stood like soldiers, flanking the ditch, pointing at the car, pointing at my tractor tracks, scribbling furiously. I could almost hear the words being spoken: reckless, endangerment, liability. They weren't interested in what actually happened. They were interested in how to spin it against me. And then, Karen arrived. She stormed across the street, her expression a mix of fury and false authority, like a queen scorned. Her red blazer caught the sun, her heels clicked against the pavement, and her finger wagged in the air as if sheer gesturing could undo what had happened. She barked at the board, waved her hands toward me, and stomped dangerously close to my property line. I didn't budge. From my porch, I simply crossed my arms and watched. She wanted a reaction, but she wasn't going to get it. Not yet. Instead, she called in backup. By noon, a police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, siren chirping once as it stopped. Out stepped two officers, their body language measured, their eyes scanning between me, the tractor parked nearby, and the BMW lying helpless in the ditch. The crowd grew. Neighbors leaned against fences, filmed with their phones, whispered eagerly. This was no longer a private dispute, it was a community spectacle, and Karen was relishing it. The officers approached me, and though I couldn't hear every word, I knew the gist. Karen had accused me of destroying her property, of endangering lives, of assaulting her vehicle with industrial machinery. She painted herself as the victim, the poor HOA president terrorized by an unhinged neighbor. But the truth was on my side. I hadn't touched her car until it blocked my legal access to my own property. The tire tracks were proof. Witnesses saw it. And the ditch itself sat entirely on my land. The officers asked questions, inspected the scene, and weighed their words carefully. When they finally walked back to Karen, I saw her posture change. Her finger pointing became more frantic, her face reddened, she shook her head violently. But the officers didn't arrest me. They didn't even issue a warning. Instead, they told her something that made her spin on her heels, storm to her SUV, and kick the mud in frustration. The law was clear. She had trespassed, she had obstructed, and I had simply moved the obstruction. It wasn't pretty, but it was justified. Still, Karen wasn't about to let the matter die there. That night, an official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. No postage, no stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a letter on HOA letterhead stamped with the board's seal, demanding immediate restitution for damages caused to the vehicle of our esteemed HOA president. The bill? $42,000. According to their assessment, I owed Karen for body damage, labor, towing, and even emotional distress. It was laughable, but it was also dangerous because while the HOA had no legal authority over me, they did have money, lawyers, and persistence. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the fire pit, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen had been humiliated in front of the neighborhood,
and her car set like a monument to her defeat. For someone like her, that wasn't just inconvenient, it was intolerable. Days passed, and the tension only grew. Karen's SUV was finally winched out of the ditch, but the scars on the ground remained. Deep ruts carved by the tractor, patches of grass torn up, and a visible reminder of what had gone down. Karen avoided me directly, but I could feel her eyes from across the street, watching, planning. The board members huddled more often, their meetings spilling into the late evening. Flyers began appearing again, this time plastered on every pole, warning of dangerous machinery operators in the community. And then came the escalation. One evening, I returned home to find my property line littered with bright orange stakes, hammered into the ground at precise intervals. A banner stretched across the posts, quote, "Future Community Easement." The HOA was trying to claim my driveway as shared property. It was outrageous. They had no jurisdiction, no deed, no legal claim. But this was Karen's playbook. If she couldn't win by intimidation, she'd bury me in bureaucracy. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table, paperwork spread out, deeds and surveys illuminated by a single lamp. I studied every line, every boundary, every legal description of my land. And the more I read, the more it became clear. My ownership was ironclad. Karen had no chance of winning this in court. But winning legally wasn't her goal. Her goal was to harass, to drain me, to make me so exhausted that I'd give in. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend my property. I was going to send a message so loud, so undeniable, that the HOA would never dare to block my driveway again. And for that, I was going to need my tractor.
The whole street had an opinion. Some still whispered that I'd gone too far when the BMW ended up in the ditch. Others finally admitted they'd been waiting for someone to stand up to Karen. The orange stakes and the phony easement banner had rattled me the most. They smelled of desperation, a paper attempt to steal what wasn't theirs. I could let bureaucracy drown me in red tape, or I could turn the facts into a weapon that cut through every forged signature in every late-night flyer. First, I lined up the facts. County records, my survey, time-stamped phone videos of Karen parking across my driveway, security footage of her circling my land at odd hours, witness statements from neighbors who had been quietly enduring her reign. It all went into one thick envelope. I sent certified copies to the county's legal department, the state HOA regulator, and a couple of local reporters who had started asking questions. When people stop treating something as gossip and start putting it on paper, the momentum changes. Then I let the machine do its work. The county sent an inspector to tour the property and verify boundaries. The inspector's neutral clipboard and measured language stripped away the shrill drama Karen thrived on. Within a week, the county issued a formal notice. The HOA's attempted easement had no legal footing, and the signage and stakes were ordered removed. The regulator opened an inquiry into the HOA's procedures. The local paper ran a short piece about a neighborhood dispute escalating into county review, and suddenly the petty emails weren't just board gossip, they were public record. Karen reacted the way bullies do when their shadow is finally revealed to everyone. She doubled down and tried to manufacture chaos. Late one night, a crew pulled up with chainsaws and began hacking at the back fence that separated a thin strip of land between my property and the HOA road. They claimed they were clearing a safety corridor. Neighbors called me, alarmed. I called the sheriff. While we waited, I prepared a safety plan and set cameras to record anything that happened. What happened instead was the kind of footage that would end up being the undoing of the HOA leadership. The cameras caught the crew removing safety posts and planting them as barricades for the HOA's makeshift claim. And among the shots was Karen, clipboard in hand, directing the work. When deputies arrived, the chain of events went from messy to criminal. Unauthorized removal of boundary markers and tampering with property lines are not garden variety HOA complaints. They cross into criminal mischief.
Deputies issued citations, took statements, and seized a few forged documents that matched the lousy forgeries I'd already flagged. By now, the neighborhood was watching the mounting paper trail like a slow-motion reveal. Board members who had been willing to sign Karen's letters without looking began to call for transparency. The board convened an emergency meeting to distance themselves from the bad press. In the interim, state regulators threatened fines and ordered a forensic audit of HOA finances. Once you start looking for one forged document, you often find others. Bank transfers labeled community maintenance started to look like a ledger of personal compensation and unexplained withdrawals. People want to trust their HOA, but they don't want to pay into thin air. Still, not everyone is moved by legal notices and audit requests. Some habits need a visual line in the dirt. That's where my tractor came back into the story, but not as a weapon this time, as a finishing statement. I could have left the reinforced gate and let the county's work implode the HOA's power slowly. I did want to make something visible, though. A clear, unambiguous barrier that showed who controlled access to my land and why. So, with county approval in hand and a crew of supportive neighbors, I used the tractor to build a permanent legal barrier. A planted berm and a row of massive anchored planters that followed the exact property line verified in the survey. We drove posts, poured concrete footings, and sank steel bollards deep. Nothing about the project violated codes. Everything about it was a statement of ownership. The tractor moved loads of dirt and materials, but it also moved the neighborhood's conversation from who's the loudest to who's legitimate. Karen tried to scream about aesthetics and closed community threats, but now her complaints were drowned out by the county notices, the audit demands, and a stack of neighbor testimonials. One by one, board members resigned rather than face subpoenas or the social fallout of being named in news articles. People who had once nodded at Karen's edicts apologized to me in private. Some organized a community potluck and thanked me for standing firm. The small gestures mattered more than I expected. They marked a kind of healing. The final blow wasn't a dramatic courtroom moment, but a quiet one. The HOA's bank account was frozen pending the audit, their insurance lapsed for failure to disclose irregularities, and the county issued a cease and desist on any further enforcement actions into properties outside their jurisdiction. Karen found herself at the center of multiple investigations: finances, forged documents, and a criminal mischief case. The high heels and red blazer lasted only until the first hearing. By then, she had lost the board, the neighbors, and the easy audience that fed her ego. When all the dust settled, the ditch remained a memory, the gate stood firm, and the tractor rested in its shed. The reinforced barrier and the planters became something neighbors pointed to, not with spite, but recognition. This was land owned and defended, with evidence, patience, and the right to protect a home. The HOA survived in name but not in function. The old regime was gone, the board restructured under new, accountable leadership, and the community slowly returned to ordinary squabbles about mailboxes rather than vendettas. Looking back, the victory wasn't about flipping an SUV or humiliating a bully. It was about refusing to be bullied. It was about gathering facts, bringing light to forged documents, letting neutral authorities weigh in, and using visible action to underscore a legal reality. The tractor was the symbol, loud, surprising, and impossible to ignore, but the slow legal work and community organizing were the real engine that dismantled an abusive power structure. Neighbors who had once enjoyed watching Karen lord it over on the signboard now laughed about how absurd it all had become. Children ran along the berm we built, flowers bloomed in the heavy planters, and my driveway remained clear. Every time I pulled in and out, I thought of how a combination of calm documentation, public exposure, and a well-timed display of strength changed the whole dynamic. And for anyone tempted to take other people's property or power for granted, there's a lesson here that traveled farther than the county line. Entitlement doesn't trump deeds. Bullying dissolves under daylight. And sometimes the most effective response to an SUV across your driveway isn't rage. It's a tractor, a camera, a lawyer, and a community ready to see the truth.